The following podcast contains bizarre theories, strange facts, and some out-of-this-world opinions. Listener discretion is advised, especially if you trust the government. A preacher builds a paradise in the jungle, but it ends with nearly 1,000 people dead. Cups of cyanide-laced Kool-Aid scattered in the dirt. Was it mass suicide, mass murder, or a CIA experiment that went too far? Tonight we're diving into Jonestown, where a utopia became a nightmare. And trust me, don't drink the Kool-Aid. Welcome to Conspiracy.
Conspiracy. Conspiracy.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Conspiracy, the podcast where I dive headfirst into the weird, the wild, and the wonderful world of conspiracies. I'm Ash, and I'm your host of Conspiracy. Quick disclaimer, this is a comedy and entertainment podcast. I joke, I rant, I spiral into tangents, and it's probably not to be taken for gospel. You get the gist. Now, before we get started, I know there was no episode last week. I was actually pretty sick, so, the voice just wasn't handling it at all. I was bedridden, couldn't get out of bed, so God forbid I didn't do an episode. So, sorry about that, guys. And also, I didn't have one backed up either, which is kind of annoying, because I usually have at least one backed up where, if something happens, or like if I am ill, I can drop an episode without having to record one, but I just didn't have one. So I had a week off, but I was sick, I was in bed. I wish I was recording a podcast, let me tell you that. But we're back, and we're covering a really big cult conspiracy this week, so I'm very, very excited. I have a little sweet spot for cults, I'm not gonna lie. I find them very, very fascinating, and if I just stop dropping episodes in the future, I've probably started one, and I'm running one. So, yeah. But if you are new around here, let me give you a quick rundown. The last episode we tackled Paul McCartney is Dead, which was quite a fun one. It was quite interesting to see the Beatles either gave us the most amazing music of all time, or the longest running tribute act in history. Definitely go and check that episode out. It was a very good one, very fun. And when we pitted Conspiracy against the Science and Reality, last week Conspiracy came out on top. So, sorry science, but better luck this week. And if you've been around longer, you'll know I recently gave this show a bit of a glow up. Bigger, juicier, more unhinged than ever. So you don't get just one theory per week anymore. Absolutely not. It's a full buffet. 4 courses of conspiratorial chaos. So here's how it goes, guys. First, we dive into the main theory, and this week, as you can tell by the title of today's episode, is Jonestown. So is it a utopia or a nightmare, cult or CIA experiment? We'll get into it. Then we're going to do Conspiracy versus Science Reality, where I pit the official narrative against the conspiracy and see who actually wins the fight. If you want, think of it as Mayweather versus Pacquiao, but with few punches and more paranoia. After that, we've got the headline of the week. I love this section. I have so much fun with this section. And let's be honest, the news already reads like a conspiracy half the time, so there's a lot of content for me to do each week on the headline of the week, so definitely stick around for that. Then we move on to Tinfoil Confessions, and also I love this section. This is brilliant. It's stories from you lot, the listeners. So you send me your maddest, weirdest, most tinfoil covered experiences, and then I read them out loud and wondering how on earth I've become UK's paranormal complaint inbox, to be fair. Today's one is brilliant, so definitely stick around for that. I couldn't believe this when I was reading it. Unbelievable stuff. I promise. And finally, we spin the Wacky Wheel of Weird. So that just chooses one random, ridiculous theory that no one saw coming. It's like the Wheel of Fortune, except instead of a holiday to Tenerife, you win existential dread. So buckle up, because this one's going to be heavy, dark at times, very weird, but that's what we do here on Conspiracy. And remember, if you like what you hear, hit follow, leave a review, and tell your mates. The more ears we get, the more fuel I've got to keep digging into the madness. Alright, let's get into it. So as I mentioned, this week we're diving into Jonestown. So let's start at the beginning and look at the rise of Jonestown's leader, Jim Jones. So who was Jim Jones before the sunglasses, the Kool-Aid, and the jungle utopia that went to hell? Well, Jim Jones was born in Indiana, 1931, middle of nowhere kind of place. Dad was a World War I veteran, broken down by gas attacks and never quite right after that. His mom was overworked, underpaid, and apparently told people Jim was destined for greatness. And, I mean, isn't that how all cult leaders start? With a mother telling them they're destined for greatness. I mean, textbook. The weird thing about little Jimmy was, even as a kid, he was pretty odd, aren't they all? But neighbours said he was obsessed with religion and death. He'd hold mock funerals for roadkill, cats, dogs and birds. He'd actually gather kids from his neighbourhood and he'd start preaching to them like he was the Pope of Possums, honestly. Also, can you imagine being 7 years old and inviting your mates round? Alright boys, well bring your pets because we're doing a sermon for that pigeon I killed. As a 7-year-old, I think I would have ran away and said, fuck that, no chance, I'm going back to play Kirby, sort your life out. Definitely not normal childhood energy, for sure. Definitely gives future cult leader energy, though, absolutely 100%. And then if you fast forward to his teens and his 20s, he becomes fascinated with preaching. He's got this charisma, he's got a deep voice, and crucially, he's talking about racial equality at a time when segregation was still alive and well in America. So that's a big deal. That drew in so many followers for Jim Jones, right? So many followers to the point where he starts a thing called the People's Temple. The People's Temple, that was started in the 1950s. And at first, it's a pretty good gig, right? Community meals, mixed race congregations, charity work. He's out there spewing, right? We're all equal, no matter your skin colour. And that sounds great on paper. And especially in the 1950s in Indiana, it was pretty radical, to be honest. And credit where it's due, he pulled people in. Black families, poor white families, people who had been shafted by the system. They all saw him as a leader who actually cared about them. Maybe he did at some point, right? Before he went off and did all the craziness that's about to come in this episode, trust me. Maybe he did care. Maybe it did stem from a very good place. Or maybe it was all a lie. But here's the catch, right? And as you'll learn throughout this episode, with Jim, there's always a catch. Because he wasn't just about preaching the gospel, he was all about control. So he starts with the People's Temple, starts demanding loyalty. Absolute loyalty. Members give up their paychecks, their houses, their savings. Everything goes into the temple. And if you didn't do that, you were out. Out of the protection of Jim Jones, out of the People's Templar. That was it. Unless you followed the rules and you gave him absolute control, you are not allowed to be in this cult. And it's a tale old as time with these cults. It's kind of like, how the hell did people just fall for this? Like, it's so crazy, but that's what it means to be a charismatic leader. And it was the 1950s, 60s. So, what else are you doing apart from taking drugs and fucking? So, I guess people were looking for something a bit more, right? Once he had that control, then came the theatrics, right? So Jim loved a good show, for sure. He loved putting on a good show. He loved watching a good show. And so he'd stage these so-called faith healings, right? Where people in wheelchairs suddenly started standing up. And also he'd pull tumours out of people's throats, right? But, spoiler alert, the tumours were actually just chicken livers hidden up his sleeve. And he'd be like, I'm now pulling this tumor out of you in the name of the People's Temple. And they would literally just appear like basically a magician and just pull out a chicken liver, and everyone would be like, oh my days, this Jim Jones is unbelievable. He's curing people, he's making people stand up out of wheelchairs and stuff like that. Like, he was a proper theatrical genius. And honestly, I just feel sorry for the poor sod that had to sneak in the chicken livers into the service. Like, sorry love, can't come home tonight for tea. Got to shove a liver in my pocket so Pastor Jim can impress Brenda on the stage and gain more power. But, you know, people bought it. That's the thing with these cults, man. People buy this shit, and I'm like, it's crazy to me, but it's because they wanted to believe, right? And Jim knew that. He exploited that. And that's the cult leader special move, right? Find people's hope and weaponize it. So by the late 60s, the People's Temple wasn't just a church anymore. It became a movement. Thousands of members, and Jim was shaking hands with politicians, handing out food to the poor, all whilst building his own power base. And that's where the real warning signs, the red flags, the stop this from happening started to show, right? Because Taylor's old as time, when a preacher's getting cozy with mayors and governors, and he's got thousands of loyal followers ready to move on command, that's not religion anymore. That's politics now, and that is power. Which definitely influences what happens down the line. So by the late 60s, early 70s, Jim Jones is no longer just a local preacher with a funny pair of shades. He's running now a growing empire. The People's Temple is spreading fast. It's grown so much and he's gained so much power. So Jim Jones decides Indiana just isn't big enough for him. So he decides to pick himself up and he moves to California, the land of cults, hippies, free love, communes, psychedelics. If you had a vision in the 70s, California was where you went to sell it, for sure. And Jones definitely sold his, and sold it hard. The temple set up in Ukiah, then San Francisco, and eventually Los Angeles. Membership balloons, thousands of people, even entire families uprooted their lives just to follow him. Why? Because Jim knew his audience. So he stopped just preaching about God. He started preaching about justice, socialism, equality on a grand scale. So if you remember, that's how we kind of started out, with this like equality and segregation in a small community. But now he's got all of these followers and he's preaching it on a grand scale under the pretense of religion, right? And also, please remember that in America at this time, it's still very much divided by race, still scarred by Vietnam, and, you know, it's drowning in poverty. So what Jim Jones was doing, it sounded revolutionary to a lot of people. But the darker side of it started to kick in, right? Because the sermons and sing-alongs changed to absolute 24/7 control, right? So this is when the members had to start turning everything over, handing everything that they own to Jim, to the People's Temple. So he had thousands of people handing over their wages, their homes, pensions to him. He also ordered that all their kids were raised communally together, and couples had to split up if Jones ordered it. Think about that. People would join in as a family, as a unit, wife, husband, child. He'd take the child away to raise them communally with other children, and he could then say, you two who are happily married now have to split because I say so. You are now divorced, and the wife comes with me. Probably, I mean, that's probably what happened, but And he did all of that in the name of socialism, right? That's what he called it. He was like, I'm leading this movement, this is how it works, and it's called socialism. When you look at it from the outside perspective, it's brainwashing. Brainwashing 101. And again, I just don't understand how people are just happy, like, oh yeah, here's my house keys, and yeah, here's my wife and all. like, I'll just go and sleep in the church hall with 400 other people whilst you're railing my wife. Like, what's going on with this? Why did people feel so attached? That's why I find it interesting. That's why I wanted to do an episode on it, because it is fascinating how he had so much control over these people, right? And in order to keep that control, he would do kind of loyalty tests, which on one hand is quite funny, but on the other hand, yeah, very brainwashing. So what he would do, right, is he would get his members to sign at the bottom of a blank piece of paper. Give me a signature on a blank piece of paper. Right. That was a loyalty test. Because what he would do after that is he would then fill in that paper with fake confessions, drug dealing, abuse, crimes, blackmail, and he would then have the signature of the person attached to that confession. So if anyone had to leave the temple, he's got major dirt on them. So that's how he would require people to show their loyalty to him and to the People's Temple, which is mental. It's a great way to do it, though, isn't it? Like, you're literally entrapping people into following you, or else. Like, it's genius in one respect, but yeah, and also he'd stage these things called white nights, right? Now this is bizarre. Any sane normal person would run for the hills here, right? So he would host these things called white nights. These were rehearsals for mass suicide. Yeah. So, again, to prove their loyalty, his followers would be told to gather together, and they would be told to drink cups of poisoned liquid, right? So they'd drink it, they'd all start crying, they'd all start panicking, and then after about 10 minutes of sweating and crying, Jones would just get on the mic and start laughing and be like, "It wasn't poison this time, guys." Mental. So they all thought that they were drinking mass suicide poison, and then he'd turn around and be like, "April Fools," but on a regular occurrence. Like, what the actual? That's not a church. Not one I would want to be a part of anyway. Crikey. Psychological warfare, isn't it? Classic psychological warfare. And it wasn't just his people, right? He was really in there in politics. The San Francisco officials supported him openly. The mayor sang his prayers. Even Harvey Milk, the gay rights activist, backed Jones publicly. Like, he had real backing from powerful, influential people at the time. He had so many connections. He had charisma. He also, which is quite interesting, quite funny, but he also started carrying around monkeys. Like, no joke, swear down. That followers said that he'd rock up places with a monkey on his shoulder, because why not? And I'm not saying owning a monkey makes you a cult leader, but if you are preaching socialism, wearing sunglasses indoors, and stroking a chimp while demanding loyalty oaths, I'd say it's a pretty red flag, to be honest. But what happened was, over time, as he got more power, more control, more followers, more monkeys, he started to become really paranoid. So this is kind of the downfall of Jim Jones and how he really turned weird. It's because he became very paranoid. He was claiming that the governments were spying on him. He told members their phones were being tapped and that their homes were being bugged. He was also convincing people and himself that America was on the brink of fascism. And when you've then terrorized people with these ideas and made them think, Jesus Christ, the world's going to shit, also on top of that, the leader that you're following and that you are brainwashed by is then saying the end is near. And when you've secluded yourself to the point where the only family you have left or the only people you talk to are within the cult, you just start believing everything, right? You believe anything and everything. Like, oh God, yeah, the world is going to shit and Jim Jones is the savior because he's literally brainwashed you. And that is the power that Jim Jones had in California and is the absolute driver into what set the stage for what was to come next. Because he then had a great escape to South America. With all those members, with all those eyes on him, there started to become this vacuum of holes in his empire. People were openly attacking him. People were being very verbal about the flaws in his system. As anything would, when something becomes really popular, people start to find the problems and it starts to become widely known. So that's what the media was trying to do, was trying to discredit Jim Jones. And, you know, they were getting people to speak out publicly, former members to speak out. Abuse allegations were coming out about Jim Jones. So what happened was Jim completely panicked. And as you'll always see with most cult leaders, when they panic, they don't give up, they double down, right? And Jones doubled down all the way to the jungle. So Jim Jones decides, we're leaving America, we're going to build paradise somewhere else completely. And he chooses Guyana in South America. A thick jungle, sweltering heat, miles from civilization. And he used Guyana because it ticked a lot of boxes. It was English speaking, socialist leaning government, cheap land, and crucially, it was far away from any US investigators. And the way he achieved it is that he pitched it to his followers as a utopia. So we're going to build Jonestown, a community of love, equality, and peace. No racism, no poverty, no capitalism, just heaven on earth. And believe it or not, his followers loved it. They sold everything, handed over the cash, packed their bags, and flew off to South America to start a new life with Jim Jones. But paradise wasn't quite the brochure promised. When the first settlers arrived in 1974, well, it was just jungle. No houses, no crops, no nothing. So they had to start hacking it out with machetes, back-breaking labour in insane heat, and when you've grown up in California or Indiana, suddenly you're living in a mosquito-infested swamp, chopping wood all day. Not exactly the Club Med, is it? But by 1977, Jones himself moves in with hundreds of members, and Jonestown finally comes to life. So it took 3 years, with wooden huts, crops, a school, a medical shack, and on the surface it looks like a functioning commune. But scratch the surface and you find the rot. So, here's the all-inclusive resort. This is what it entails, right? Food was mostly rice, beans, and a bit of bread. Meat was very rare, and everyone was underfed and malnutritioned. Work, people were working 12, 14, even 16-hour days in the fields, kids included. The housing, families were crammed into huts, no privacy whatsoever, and when it came to healthcare, they had a medic but only with aspirin and plasters. Meanwhile, Jim did have a private stash of pills and injections to keep himself buzzing, for sure. And then you had the loudspeakers. Jones had a PA system rigged up across the whole settlement, right? Day and night, he'd blast sermons, rants, and paranoia into every hut. So imagine you're trying to sleep, and instead of rain on the roof and you're in your bliss all-inclusive resort, you've got your cult leader screaming through a megaphone, "The CIA are coming! capitalism is evil, pass the kidney beans. Yeah, pretty much. It sounds like North Korea, doesn't it? I'm not gonna lie. And the rules. They had very, very strict rules. No one left without permission. Letters were censored. Visitors were monitored. And any families that these people had back home who wrote desperate letters never arrived to the person they were sending it to. So Jones was still painting this settlement as a complete utopia to the outside world, right? He even invited at one point American journalists down to do carefully staged tours, kids singing songs about socialism. So, but very, very controlled, very Kim Jong-un, isn't it? But behind the smiles, it was just pure fear, man. So yeah, life in Jonestown, definitely not paradise. More like a nightmare package holiday you can't leave. Like 2 weeks, all inclusive, in sunny Guyana. Activities include farming until you collapse, hunger, paranoia, and one-man midnight sermons. Book now. Nothing beats a Jet 2 holiday. But the nightmare was only just beginning for these people, because eventually the outside world did come knocking. Families back in the US were making so much noise about Jonestown, and more journalists started sniffing around. And then a congressman decided, I'm going to pay a visit and make sure everything is okay in Jonestown and all of these people are safe. And when that congressman's plane touched down in Guyana, well, everything spiraled. Alright, so we've arrived November 1978, the tragedy. And trigger warning, there are some things in here that aren't pleasant. So, just to let you know, there are some things coming up. So, by late 1978, Jonestown isn't just a commune, it is making headlines. Families back in the US are screaming for answers. Where are my kids? Where's my sister? Why am I not hearing any information from this place? Press is circling. Defectors are telling horror stories. The US government, they just can't ignore it anymore. So, enter Congressman Leo Ryan. He's from California, he's bold, and he's decided to fly down to Guyana to see Jonestown with his own eyes. He brings a delegation of journalists, cameramen, and worried relatives of temple members. So let's slow down this section a little bit, because this is where everything unravels. November 17th, 1978. The congressman and his entourage, they arrive to Jonestown. And at first, Jonestown puts on a show. Smiling kids, communal meals, songs about love and socialism, cameras rolling, everyone's acting like it's Disneyland in the jungle. But the cracks appear, and they appear fast. Because during the visit, a temple member slips Congressman Ryan a note, and it says, "Help us, get us out." Can you imagine that moment? Cameras rolling, Jones smiling, and this desperate hand sneaks across with a scrap of paper. Suddenly, the facade absolutely crumbles, because others start coming up to the congressman, whispering to him like, "Hey, yeah, help, we want to leave, please get us out of here." And unfortunately for these people, Jones noticed. He saw what was happening, and he became furious, because there was no way he was going to be able to stop what snowball effect was about to happen with people defecting from him. He saw this as, I'm losing my power, and he was so wrapped up in his own power and his own success with this place that he wasn't expecting people to defect like this, or to tell the congressman that they were in trouble. So Jones managed to hide his furiousness and acted like everything was normal until the next day. So we've arrived on the morning of November 18th, 1978. This is the fatal day of Jonestown, and here's what happened. So Jones's paranoia completely spikes in the morning. People are packed, they're ready to go, they're leaving, and he's trying to talk everyone down. He pleads with people, tries to manipulate them, but absolutely no use. Families are ready to go. Congressman Ryan and his team rounds everyone up, all the defectors, into trucks and head straight for the airstrip at Port Kaituma. And the tension in this moment is unbearable. You've got all of these defectors, you've got Congressman, you've got his team, you've got family members, all racing to get to this airstrip to get the hell out of Guyana, right? And then absolute chaos unfolds. As the group arrives at the airport, they start boarding the two planes to get the fresh hell out of there, and then a tractor and a trailer pulls up carrying temple gunmen, and they just start opening fire on these people. Bullets ripping through the air, the cameras drop, people scatter. Congressman Ryan is shot dead on the tarmac. The 3 journalists are killed. 1 defector is killed. Several more wounded. It's absolutely brutal scenes. Sudden, final, and they were just instructed to just kill everyone in sight. Do not let these people leave Guyana. And back in Jonestown, the news has reached now to Jim Jones that his orders have been carried out. They've opened fire, they've shot people, they've killed people. So he gathers everyone in the pavilion, which is like a communal space for all of the members where he delivers his sermons. It's basically the heart of the settlement. So he gathers everyone there. Hundreds and hundreds of people all pile in under this tin roof, under the orders of Jim Jones and his gunmen. So at this point, Jones takes the microphone. His voice, very calm, almost soothing, proper, like, controlled. And he delivers this following speech, right? He says, "They will come for us. The government will invade. They'll take your children, torture them, experiment on them. We cannot let that happen. The only way out is through revolutionary suicide." End quote. And then the final moments of Jonestown begin. So a large vat is rolled forward and it's full of a purple grape drink, right? We all know the saying, don't drink the Kool-Aid. But, fun fact, it was actually Flavor-Aid, not even Kool-Aid. But we'll get into that in a bit. And as you can imagine, it's not sugar and water. It's laced with cyanide, Valium, and sedatives. And the most chilling part of this whole thing, I think, is that the children had to go first. The children had to drink this drink first. So the parents were ordered to bring the children first, because remember, around the edges, gunmen, to the Kool-Aid, or the Flavor-Aid, and drink first. Immediately after, convulsions, choking, and their tiny bodies collapsing. The children, all dead. And once the children were dead, the parents follow. Some went willingly, others were forced by the guards standing watch with the rifles, and anyone who resisted was actually injected with the substance. So can you imagine that moment? Hundreds of people gathered under that pavilion, realizing what's happening, the chaos, the panic, the sound of crying, retching, screaming. It was an absolute bloodbath. And guess what? Jones himself never drank from the vat. He was later found dead from a gunshot wound though, which was likely self-inflicted, but even that does remain disputed to this day. So by the end of the day of November 18th, 1978, 918 people were dead. Nearly 300 of them were children. Rows upon rows of bodies, which was later photographed by the press, which is an image that has burnt itself into history. It was the largest single loss of American civilian life until 9/11. And all of this in the middle of the jungle, under the control of one man. And whew, it's a lot, isn't it? And again, I know it's grim, but I can't get past the fact that it wasn't even Kool-Aid. Everyone remembers it as Kool-Aid, don't they? Like, don't drink the Kool-Aid. But it was actually Flavor Aid. Imagine that. You've sold your house, you left your country, uprooted your life, you've died for your leader, and it's the knockoff brand. Even in death, Jim Jones was a cheap motherfucker. So yeah, crazy story, chaos of a day, and that is backed up by some of the survivors of the day. So nearly 1,000 people did die, but some did survive to tell the tale, and they also make it clear that it wasn't just a we all line up and drink Kool-Aid. It was chaos, right? So one of the survivors, Odell Rhodes, so he was there when it all kicked off. He said the moment when the parents were told to give the poison to their kids, the entire place just erupted, right? Children were convulsing, people screaming, and chaos breaking out in every direction. He said that he legged it into the jungle and managed to hide out until help came. And fair play to Odell for getting out. If it was me, I probably would have tripped over something on the way and just done my leg in or something. And then you got Tim and Mike Carter, right? These are the two brothers. Jim Jones trusted them with carrying cash and documents out of Jonestown that day, supposedly to fund temple operations elsewhere. So they survived because they were literally on an errand run while the mass poisoning happened. So that's lucky. You nip out of work for a second, come back to find everyone dead. Definitely the worst you miss the meeting story ever, wasn't it? Forget your office moving the chairs around, mate. You come back and nearly 900 people are gone. Another survivor was Odell's friend Stanley Clayton, who escaped after pretending to go along with the crowd, then bolted. He remembered the screams, the bodies piling up, and guards making sure nobody resisted. Others weren't in Jonestown that day. Some temple members were in Georgetown, Guyana's capital, running errands or working. They actually heard the news over the radio and thought it was a joke, because how would you believe that? Nearly 1,000 people gone in one afternoon. It doesn't seem real. And then there's actually a heartbreaking detail that a handful of children hid under the bed and in ditches, refusing to drink. So when you hear some people talk about Jonestown, they just kind of go, oh yeah, they all just lined up and drank the Kool-Aid and all died. But actually, it was not like that at all. It was actually very, very horrific. Way messier, darker, and way more violent than anyone can imagine. Right, so we've taken a look at the official story and how that unfolded. Now it's time to take a dive into the conspiracies surrounding it. And we're starting with the CIA. Because the CIA had a little project you might have heard of, MKUltra. Now, I have done an episode previously on MKUltra, so if you're interested in a much deeper dive into MKUltra and what that was, definitely go and check out the episode. But just to give you a quick recap of what MKUltra is, from the 1950s into the 1970s, the CIA ran secret experiments on American and Canadian citizens, many without their consent, and the goal was to achieve mind control. So they tested LSD, barbiturates, amphetamines. They also used sensory deprivation tanks, hypnosis, electroshock therapy, and they pushed people to mental breakdowns, studying how to erase and rewrite behaviours. And I will admit, it does sound like bad science fiction, doesn't it? But it is real. It's very well documented. By the mid-70s, it was exposed in the press. The CIA admitted to some of it, then claimed they shut it all down. But theorists argue maybe they didn't shut it down, maybe they just moved it off the books, and maybe Jonestown was one of those test sites. Now, if you compare Jonestown to MKUltra tactics, 1. Drugs everywhere, Jonestown wasn't just stockpiling rice and beans, it had a literal pharmacy. And after the tragedy, investigators found stashes of amphetamines, barbiturates, chloral hydrate, Valium, thousands and thousands of doses, by the way, not just a little stash. And survivors recalled Jones ordering injections constantly on people, saying that they were vitamins, tranquilizers, sedatives. Some claim that he had personal nurses whose whole job was to keep him dosed up and keep the flock docile. So that gives a kind of a chemical management on a massive scale rather than just a jungle commune. And then you've also got this sleep deprivation and loudspeakers. MKUltra loved to break people down with exhaustion, and in Jonestown they had a 24-hour PA system. Jones would rant into microphones late at night, speeches blaring from tinny speakers across the compound. Survivors said sleep was almost impossible. You've also got social isolation. So MKUltra experiments showed cutting people off from family and outside contact made them more palatable. In Jonestown, letters were censored, visitors were stage managed, members were discouraged, even threatened if they talked about leaving. It's very similar. Survivors said it felt like a prison camp dressed up as a utopia, right? You got rehearsed obedience, so you got those infamous white nights where Jones would stage fake suicide drills, handing out fake poison cups, then reveal later it's not real. Members went through this multiple times. MKUltra tested conditioning, reward punishment cycles, force scenarios. So Jonestown's rehearsals look suspiciously like obedience training. And then you got the fact of a charismatic handler. MKUltra always relied on authority figures, doctors, scientists, hypnotists. Jones filled that role perfectly, right? Followers described him as mesmerizing, godlike, terrifying. His sunglasses, his booming voice, his total control over you when you ate, slept, or worked. That's not a preacher, that's a manipulator in chief. And if you think about it, if you add in the timing, MKUltra officially ended in 1973, Jonestown peaked in the late 70s. What if it wasn't a coincidence? What if the project simply moved to Guyana, a place outside US law, away from journalists, where hundreds of people could be studied in isolation? Researchers like Michael Mears and conspiracy writers like John Judge argued Jonestown had all the hallmarks of a covert social experiment. Its remote location, subject population cut off from family, control through drugs, sleep deprivation, drills, a catastrophic test ending. Sounds less like a commune, more like a black site laboratory. And finally, you got the CIA connection. After the massacre, US military teams arrived shockingly fast to recover the bodies. Theorists argue they weren't just cleaning up corpses, they were cleaning up evidence. Medical records, drug stashes, financial ledgers, all vanished. Official reports were full of holes. And Jim Jones himself, some claim he'd been spotted years earlier attending suspicious political meetings, possibly as a government asset. A man who could mobilize thousands of followers was useful until he wasn't. Alright, so let's follow the golden rule of conspiracies and follow the money. Because Jonestown wasn't some broke hippie commune scraping by on beans and rice. Not at all. The People's Temple was a financial machine. The temple had so much wealth. Don't forget the members handed over everything. Their wages, their homes, savings, social security checks. Whole families liquidated their assets and gave them to Jones. We're talking tens of millions in today's money. By the mid-70s, the People's Temple controlled real estate in California worth millions. Apartment blocks, official buildings, even nursing homes. Add in donations from thousands of members plus government grants for their social work, and you got serious cash flow. And after the massacre, investigators found bank accounts in Panama, Switzerland, and the Caribbean. Some traced to the temple, others mysterious dead ends. Estimates do vary, but we're talking anywhere from $10 to $20 million missing. Just gone. Vanished into the jungle. So, let's take a look at where the money went. Theory 1 is that it went to the CIA Black Ops Fund. Some researchers argue the missing millions were siphoned straight into covert accounts. If Jonestown was an MKUltra style field lab, you'd expect it to be bankrolled quietly and cleaned up after. Offshore banks were, and still are, classic CIA playgrounds. Theory 2 suggests it went to revolutionary pipelines. So others argue Jones was funneling money to socialist movements abroad. So if you remember, he styled himself as a radical anti-capitalist. Guyana was friendly, but neighbouring countries? Lots of leftist guerrilla movements. So was Jones trying to bankroll a wider socialist revolution in South America? Because if so, that would have put him squarely on the CIA's hit list. Theory 3 is that there was an escape plan. So another angle is that Jones was planning his getaway. Survivors record him talking about fleeing to the Soviet Union. There were even meetings with Soviet officials in Georgetown. So could the missing millions have been a nest egg for Jones and his inner circle to defect to Moscow? If so, it never happened, but the money trail suggests he was moving assets offshore in preparation. Theory 4 was that it was just old-fashioned theft. So of course, the simplest explanation is still pretty grim, but it's that Jim Jones was a con man. Maybe he just pocketed millions for himself while his followers starved on rice and beans. But the thing is, he's dead, and we'll probably never know the truth. Because when US troops arrived to clean up, much of the financial paperwork vanished. Some files were recovered, but others were burned, shredded, and disappeared. And if there's one thing we know about money, it's this. When $20 million goes missing, somebody benefited for sure. So the money trail adds another layer. Jonestown wasn't just ideology, it was a financial empire, and when it collapsed, the cash flowed somewhere. The question is, was it the CIA, the Soviets, or Jim Jones himself who laughed all the way to the bank? So our next conspiracy surrounds the death of Jim Jones, because as I mentioned earlier, Jim Jones himself didn't drink the poison. When recovery teams finally entered the compound, they found him slumped in a deck chair at the pavilion, no cup in his hand, no foam at the mouth, just a man in sunglasses, dead from a gunshot wound to the head. The official story, as we went through, was suicide. But there are doubts. Witnesses said the angle of the wound looked a bit odd, too awkward for a self-inflicted shot. The gun, a .38 revolver, was found nearby, but no one saw him pull the trigger. Some survivors suggested it might have been an aide or a loyalist who shot him, either at his request, a kind of mercy killing, or to silence him permanently. Others go darker. What if it wasn't one of his own? So if Jonestown was wrapped up with the CIA and MKUltra, maybe the CIA put the hit on him. Because if Jonestown was tangled up in covert experiments, Jim Jones would have been a liability once things went south. So he knew too much and he could expose the project. So the CIA just got rid of him. Because also, you've got the symbolism of the death, right? Jones spent years telling his people, I'll die with you, I'll be the first to drink. And in the end, he wasn't. He died quicker, different, separate. So whether that was self-inflicted or not, it underlines the hypocrisy. You know, he demanded loyalty but didn't walk the same path. And some survivors actually say that's the cruelest cut of it all. That even at the very end, Jim Jones was still keeping something back for himself. So, was it suicide, a loyalist's final act, or a CIA bullet to tie off a nightmare? We will probably never know that, but what we do know is this. Jim Jones didn't drink the Flavor Aid, and maybe that's the truest symbol of all. He made everyone else swallow the lie, and he found another way out. So that brings us to a close on Jonestown, the official story and the conspiracies surrounding it. So let's put it to the test in Conspiracy versus Science Reality. Here we go, the big clash. Gloves on, fallouts adjusted. In the red corner, we got Science and Reality, the official story, the historians, the boring but probably right crowd. And in the blue corner, we've got Conspiracy, the whispers, the cover-ups, the juicy bits that make this podcast worth existing. Who's walking out alive tonight? Let's find out. Ding ding! Science struts in, smug as ever, saying, look, it was a cult. Simple. Jim Jones brainwashed his followers with charisma, control and drugs. They gave him their lives and he cashed in. No CIA needed, no lizard people hiding behind the beans, just good old-fashioned manipulation. Conspiracy replies, oh really? Then explain the injections. Explain the 100 plus bodies with needle marks and bullet holes. Explain the fact kids were forced first. That's not a mass suicide, that's a massacre. And massacres need orchestration. Crowd goes wild. Science counters. Okay, sure, some were forced. Cults get messy, but you don't need the CIA for that. You got guards, you got fear, you got years of conditioning. People will do horrific things under pressure. Psychology explains this. Conspiracy responds, yes, psychology. Or mind control experiments, sleep deprivation, loudspeakers, heavy drugs, fake suicide drills. That's straight from the MKUltra handbook. You really think Jim Jones invented those methods himself? Please, the man couldn't even buy proper Kool-Aid. Science isn't rattled. Responds, MKUltra, mate, that's tinfoil chat. Yes, the CIA messed around with LSD and hypnosis, but you don't need to invoke shadowy experiments to explain why desperate people in a jungle obeyed their messiah. But conspiracy's not done. Oh no? Then where did the millions go? Temple accounts in Panama, Switzerland, vanished after the massacre. Missing millions don't just evaporate. Someone took it. And my money's on, well, their money's on, the CIA. Science wipes away the sweat. Okay, money disappears in every cult. Jones was a conman. Maybe he stashed it. Maybe it's still in offshore accounts. But that doesn't prove Langley was footing the bill. Conspiracy grins, uppercut ready. Alright then, last card. Jim Jones' own death. Shot in the head. Officially suicide, but wrong angle, no witnesses, and a bullet instead of cyanide. That's not revolutionary suicide. That's damage control. That's someone saying, Jim mate, you've failed the experiment. Time to clock out. Science staggers. Crowd gasps. The final flurry. Science rallies. Look. Sometimes the simplest explanation is true. A cult leader manipulated his followers into death. Tragic, horrifying, but not a government plot. Conspiracy lands the closer. Or maybe the simplest explanation is just the cover story. Because when nearly 1,000 people die in one afternoon, and the only phrase that survives is the wrong brand of squash, someone's pulling strings behind the curtain. Ding ding! So the verdict. Both fighters staring each other down. The ref hesitates and declares, this one is going to Conspiracy. Why? Because while science explains a cult, conspiracies explains the holes, the injections, the missing millions, the CIA fingerprints all over the methods. And tonight, the holes matter. Plus, conspiracy brought a folding chair. Science only brought a clipboard. Easy win. So there it is. This week, conspiracy takes the crown again. Science seriously needs to step it up to win next week. But before we get too smug, let's check in with the headlines. Because if Jonestown teaches us anything, it's that the real world can be just as mad as the conspiracies. Tonight's oddly aquatic top story comes from the Sun Online with the following headline. Mystery as massive creature washes up on popular UK beach, but no one knows what it is. A colossal creature has washed ashore, and when I say colossal, I mean it's like a ribcage the size of your dubious student loan. Locals in Wales woke up to find something carcassy on Stephensidon Beach in Pembrey, Carmarthenshire. Speculation says whale, eco-awareness people say pollution, and others say not of this earth. We go live now to our Coastal Corner correspondent, Gareth by the Sea. Yep, Ash, I'm standing smack dab on the beach, and behind me is one of the most unidentifiable carcasses this side of the Loch Ness. It looks like half a whale, half a picnic gone wrong. A ribcage thick monstrosity holding on for dear life in the sand. Locals are snapping photos like it's a TikTok prop. Some locals are convinced it's a mutated sea monster. Others are debating whether it's a climate change conspiracy or eco-muscle flex from the dumped plastics. In short, moral is low, and the fish and chip shop's called in sick. Back to the studio. Marine experts insist it's likely a whale that succumbed to malnutrition or pollution, but conspiracy chitter-chatter is ablaze. Alien signal debris washed up to assess humans from the coast, a secret government biotest on sea life gone rogue, or perhaps the creature is a prequel to the Loch Ness Monster, testing its beach landing before appearing as Nessie himself. We now cross to our marine cryptid analyst, Dr. B. Beast Watkins, armed only with a clipboard and skepticism. I've been studying coastal remains for 30 years, and I've seen lungfish and jellyfish big enough to haunt your nightmares. But this is next level. It's like the sand spat out a rib skeleton and a mystery wrapped in barnacles. If that's not alien biome engineering, I don't know what is. Back to you. And just as we sink into the cosmic wonder, get this. Local council sources say the creature has been claimed by a nearby chip shop. That's right. The remains are being removed for health hazard reasons and possibly under the threat of becoming batter dipped. Classic seaside. So, is the mystery creature on Pembrey Beach a whale victim of pollution, an alien biology testbed, or the Loch Ness prequel? Time and proper necropsy will tell. And that was your headline of the week.
The Tinfoil Confessions.
Okay, it's time for Tinfoil Confessions, the part of the show where you lot send in your weird stories and I sit here smiling at the fact that I've become an official lost property office for aliens, ghosts and government cover-ups. This week's confession comes from Emily. This one hooked me straight away when I was reading it because it's got everything you want in a conspiracy story. It's brilliant, Emily. There's late night mysteries, strange lights in the sky, physical after effects, and there's even a warning to keep quiet. And trust me, once you hear this, you'll be side-eyeing the night sky next time you stumble out of a kebab shop at 2 a.m. Let's take a look. So here's what she wrote in. Hi Ash, love the podcast. Thank you. Guys, I'm loving the love. Keep sending that in. Anyway, sorry. She writes, Hi Ash, love the podcast. And I've never written into anything like this before, but I felt like I had to share what happened to me. This was a few years ago when I was living in Manchester. It was about 2 a.m. and I was walking home after a night out. The streets were quiet, hardly anyone around, and then I heard this sound. It wasn't like traffic or music from a club. It was this really low humming, almost like when you stand near power lines, and it felt like it was moving above me. I looked up and saw 3 lights. They were in a triangle formation, perfectly spaced. At first I thought maybe it was drones, but these were way too big. They looked like they were covering the whole street. They drifted right over me, completely silent, then suddenly shot upwards and vanished. Just gone. I was frozen to the spot. And the strangest thing was, cars went past like normal and nobody else seemed to react. I felt like I was the only person who could see it. Okay, well, let's pause, because classic UFO witness energy, it was massive, huge, nobody else saw it. So, Emily, either you've got chosen by aliens, or... So, Emily, either you got chosen by the aliens, or your mates were too busy queuing up for cheesy chips. But she continues, the next day I couldn't stop thinking about it. I checked the news, social media, everything, and nothing. Nobody was talking about it. But then I found a thread on Reddit from someone about 3 miles away saying they'd seen triangle lights the same night. They described this strange buzzing in their teeth as it passed. And that's what really got me, because I'd had the exact same thing. My fillings ached all night afterwards. It sounds ridiculous, but it happened. Okay, let's pause again. So, basically, Emily, you're telling me that the aliens were messing with your fillings. Well, that has to be the most NHS UFO story I've ever heard. Forget abductions, forget your crop circles. These aliens are just moonlighting as dodgy dentists. It's interesting though. It's interesting that you found someone on Reddit that also saw the same lights the same night. Let's not take away from that. But let's move on with the story. A week later, something else happened. I got a letter pushed through my door. There was no stamp, no address on it, just plain paper with block capitals that said, "Do not talk about the lights." And that's all it said. No explanation, nothing. I still don't know if it was a prank or something more serious, but it scared me more than the lights did, because it meant somebody knew. Somebody was watching me. Alright, Emily. Well, that escalated quickly. Yeah. Maybe you should move to the countryside? Or into a forest somewhere? I don't know. Are you just living your life normal now? I also need more information from you. Please send me more information. Are you just living your life as normal now? And is anyone still watching you? Like, obviously you're alive because you sent this in, but that is weird. Like, 1 minute you're tipsy in Manchester staring at triangles. Next minute you're basically in an episode of X-Files, the Northern Edition. Like, that's mental. Like, what do you think? Do you think it was, like, someone official sending you that note? Or did you tell someone and they were pranking you? They just sent that to you to kind of wind you up? And, you know, you also attached the photo of that in your email, and you just can't tell if it's official. It's literally just writing on a paper, isn't it? So, very scary though. And also, if it was MI5 or some governing body, like, get with the times. Like, we use WhatsApp now. Why are you sending me handwritten letters? Save your ink, save the paper, send me a WhatsApp. Don't talk about the lights. Blocked. But she goes on and closes with, anyway, I've never seen anything like it since, but every time I'm walking home late, I can't help looking up, just in case it happens again. So there you go. Emily's UFO over Manchester. Triangle lights in the sky, buzzing teeth, and a menacing letter through the door. Honestly, it's got everything. Mystery, paranoia, and a healthy dose of what the actual hell. And if you've got a story like Emily's, I want it. Whether it's a haunted microwave, aliens at the kebab shop, or your cat speaking fluent Latin after midnight, send it in. DM me on Insta or TikTok @Conspiracy, or you can email me, conspiracy@gmail.com. Because remember, your madness fuels this segment. And trust me, I've been reading the gems you've been filling my inbox with. Keep them coming.
The Wacky Wheel of Weird.
And now it's time for our final section, my favourite bit of chaos, the Wacky Wheel of Weird. So here's how it works. I've got a big old digital wheel, each slice of it covered in the strangest, silliest, most ridiculous conspiracies known to mankind. These are the ones that aren't quite big enough for a full conspiracy deep dive, but do deserve 5 minutes of pure chaos. Some of these are going to make you laugh, some will make you scratch your head, and some will make you question whether humanity's collective brain has literally melted. So, without further ado, let's spin the wheel and see what madness the universe wants us to explore today. And today's wheel lands on Disney's Frozen conspiracy. Right, let me pull it up. Love it. Okay, so, you know how everyone jokes about Walt Disney being cryogenically frozen under Disneyland, right? Well, conspiracy theorists claim Disney got sick of people Googling Disney Frozen and finding articles about their frosty founder's severed noggin on ice. Solution: release a massive hit movie called Frozen, and suddenly when you search Disney Frozen, you don't get cryogenic scandal, you get Elsa belting out power ballads in an ice palace. Genius PR move. And let's be honest, if Walt really is frozen somewhere, Let It Go probably isn't the song he wants blasting above his head. Conceal Don't Feel, more like Conceal Don't Fall. The theory goes deeper though. Some say the film's popularity wasn't just luck, it was engineered. Disney poured marketing money into making Frozen a global obsession, so the search engines would be flooded forever. If you think about it, the highest grossing animated movie ever, and it just happens to erase every Google search about Walt's frosty nap. Coincidence? Or algorithmic brainwashing wrapped in a snowman's sidekick? Also, explain why Olaf talks so much about summer. It's subliminal messaging. See, nothing frozen here, totally normal. Please don't ask about the head in the basement. Of course, some would say this theory is silly. The movie was based on Hans Christian Andersen's Snow Queen, developed for decades, yada yada. But, I don't know, feels a bit too neat, doesn't it? So, is Frozen just a charming musical, or Disney's most successful conspiracy cover-up of all time? You decide. And that was your Wacky Wheel of Weird. And that brings us to the end of this week's episode of Conspiracy. We've gone from jungles of Jonestown to UFOs over Manchester, from mystery monsters on Welsh beaches to the possibility that Frozen is less about singing sisters and more about hiding Walt Disney's icebox bonds. So, what do we make of Jonestown? Was it mass suicide, mass murder, or a CIA experiment that spiraled out of control? Was Jim Jones a cult leader who lost the plot, or a puppet whose string got cut when the truth got too messy? Either way, one thing's clear, someone's lying to us. If you enjoyed this week's episode, do me a favour, hit follow, leave a review, and tell a mate who loves a good conspiracy. That's how we grow this little tinfoil community. Don't forget, if you've got your own tinfoil confession, I want to hear it. UFOs, cryptids, ghost cards, haunted kettles, shadowy men in Greggs. Whatever you got, drop me a message on Insta or TikTok @conspiracy, or email me, conspiracy@gmail.com. You might hear your story right here on the show. And next week, well, who knows what the wheel, the inbox, or the headlines will bring, but one thing's for sure, it'll be bigger, juicier, and more unhinged than ever. Until next time, keep your tinfoil hats polished, keep questioning everything, and remember, the truth is out there.
Conspiracy. Conspiracy.